A long campaign is now.
This is the car market in Mogadishu.
NATO's military success against
many Western nations.
This is on assignment.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to our show, a special July 4th edition of On Assignment.
As the United States celebrates its Independence Day, we are taking a look at the history of two national icons, the Declaration of Independence and the American flag.
Then, the patriotism of war, have costs in Iraq shaken the U.S. resolve?
And the voice of America in another period of war will take a trip back in time.
Don't go away, we are on assignment right now.
On July 4th, 1776, representatives of the 13 American colonies officially approved the document that announced the severing of ties with Britain. The Continental Congress issued the Declaration of Independence in several forms, and the most famous is the signed copy on display here in Washington at the National Archives.
And I was there to see the Declaration and talked about its unique history with archivist and historian Michael Hussey. We spoke in the Archives Rotunda for the Charters of Freedom, where the Declaration and other documents are housed.
Why is it so dark here?
It's dark in here because light fades documents, and we're all about preserving documents so that if by some magic we could come back here in 100 years, we would still be able to read these documents. So we keep the light at a very low level. Your eyes adjust eventually, but it's a low level, and a constant temperature and a constant humidity level, because parchment in particular does not like changes in temperature, humidity, or light.
And right behind us is a Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
That is something unique. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's one of the highlights of my job here, actually, that I get to see it every day. It's a document that millions of Americans have seen over the years. Even in its very earliest years, Americans wanted to see this, what some people have referred to as the birth certificate of the United States. In this document, you have all of the specific reasons that the colonists wanted to break from England. They'd had enough of certain things. But you also have this beautiful, soaring rhetoric about unalienable rights of all men who are created equal to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Amazing words, which Thomas Jefferson and a committee of four other people, including Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, wrote.
So how do you preserve documents here?
Yeah, well, in this case, in our holdings, we have somewhere above 12 billion documents, and all of them are precious to us. These documents here in the Rotunda, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, get a little bit of extra preservation treatment. They're in specially constructed, state-of-the-art cases that contain no oxygen whatsoever. They contain argon gas, which doesn't interact chemically with the documents. Again, the light in here is kept very low. These cases that they're in are sealed airtight, so that, again, no oxygen can get in there. All of the materials and the engineering is absolute state-of-the-art.
This is the document that was signed by the founding father. This is the original document.
This is the original document signed by the founding father, or at least those founding fathers who were in Philadelphia at the Second Continental Congress in 1776.
What do you think would be the value of this document?
I couldn't even put a dollar amount on it. It's so valuable. It founded our country. It set our ideals as a nation. Not that we have always lived up to them. To look back on it, all men are created equal is one of the key phrases of the document, and yet we, as a people, we owned slaves at the time.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
What would be the most unique fun fact that our audience are not familiar with, you think, about the Declaration of Independence?
Well, I think what occurs to me is that most people think Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence from start to finish. And he certainly was the key author, but it was a committee of 5 men who wrote it. And, you know, John Adams and Benjamin Franklin did some minor editing. What I find somewhat humorous is that once Jefferson then presented it to the full Continental Congress, they did what nowadays we would call cut and paste. You know, I mean, they were really heavily editing it. They left many parts of it alone. And Jefferson's reaction to that was just outrage that they had mangled his masterpiece. So I often think of Jefferson sitting there in Independence Hall just kind of steaming as his work is being edited. I think it turned out very well, but he had sort of some authorial, as an author, he wanted it to be just the way he wanted it.
Did it come back to the original form, or finally he settled with the changes?
He settled with the changes,
Okay.
and he signed it, but he was never happy with the changes that were made with it. And he was happy enough, but never happy.
But that speaks volumes about how this country functions, that there are different people coming together with different ideas and then coming to a mutual ground where they can decide what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this document, they just didn't come in one day and say, let's do it and just draft something and we'll sign it. You know, it wasn't that at all. There was days and days and months of debate. Some didn't agree with having any Declaration of Independence. They wanted to maintain some connection to Great Britain. So yes, you're absolutely right. That bringing the rough draft back to Congress and having it being debated and pulled apart and every word kind of analyzed takes some time. It's not always pleasant, particularly if you're someone like Jefferson. But you're right. It very much was a group statement. It was a statement of a people, even though written mostly by one person.
And we want to thank archivist and historian Michael Hussey for that great conversation. And Alex, is another fun fact, which people might not know. The term Declaration of Independence is how we refer to it, but it's not actually used in the document itself.
Very interesting. Well, we are turning now to another American icon that we all know well, the American flag. And the particular flag that we want to focus on here was raised over Fort McHenry in Baltimore on the morning of September 14th, 1814. That move signaled the American victory over the British in the battle for the city during the War of 1812.
Well, the sight of the flag inspired lawyer and poet Francis Scott Key to write the Star-Spangled Banner, now the American national anthem. The original Star-Spangled Banner is one of the most treasured artifacts at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C.
Well, I went to the museum to see and talk about the flag with curator Jennifer Jones. Take a look. Jennifer, tell us about this exhibit that we're in, and specifically this woman we see behind us.
Sure. The exhibit that we're standing in is the Star-Spangled Banner. It's the home of the flag that inspired Francis Scott Key to write the words to our national anthem. Behind me is Mary Pickersgill, and she is the woman responsible for making this historic flag. It is 30 feet by 42 feet large at the time of its making. And Mary was hired by the commander of Fort McHenry to make this extremely large flag. And the George Armistead, who was the commander, told her he wanted a flag so large that the British would be sure to see it at the fortification. And so it is an extra large garrison-sized flag.
Now, many people in our audience are foreign. They're not here in the United States. And so for our international viewers who did not grow up in American history classes, tell us a little bit about the history of this flag and of the Star-Spangled Banner.
Sure. The flag was flown during the War of 1812. America went back to war with Britain in 1812. And in order to, what we call, resecure our American democracy. And so it was the second battle of freedom for America. And the war lasted for a little over 2 years. The Treaty of Ghent was what actually was signed in late 1814, but there were still battles in the United States with the British up until early 1815.
Well, we've been talking about it so much. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at it?
Okay.
Let's walk over
Great.
and check out the flag.
What you're seeing behind me is the Star-Spangled Banner in the chamber that we designed for it so that it is in low light, it is in constant temperature and humidity control, and it's actually in low oxygen. Normal oxygenation levels in what we breathe every day are about 21%. It's in less than 14% oxygen, and that's to help the long-term preservation of the artifact. And so what you're seeing is the flag laying on a specially built table that helps to show the visitor what it actually looks like. So it's about at a 10-degree angle. So when you're up here and you get to see the flag, you're actually at the same height as the flag is. You'll notice one of the stars is missing. It was cut away, and we don't know by whom. The daughter of Armistead, Georgiana Armistead, who was sort of the caretaker of the flag, said it was cut away for a very important individual, but she never would reveal to whom it was given.
Let's talk about Francis Scott Key and how he came up with the lyrics to the Star-Spangled Banner.
Okay, Francis Scott Key was a Washington attorney, and he had been hired and asked to come and secure a release of a doctor who had been taken, had been captured by the British as they came through Washington. And so they were holding this doctor on a British ship in the harbor outside of Baltimore. So Francis Scott Key went to Baltimore, got on a small ship, and went out to meet the British fleet before the Battle of Baltimore itself. The British, as they were getting ready to prepare for the Battle of Baltimore, realized that he may have heard too much about their plans, so they held him on his ship next to the British fleet. They detained him. On the morning of September 14th, he didn't know whose flag would be flying after the battle had ceased. And so as the smoke cleared and as the storm, all the clouds cleared because it was a stormy evening at the last part of the battle, he was on his own ship, and he wanted to see whose flag was being raised over Fort McHenry, because if it was the British flag, we had lost.
Right.
And so as he stood there looking to see, possibly using a spyglass that we have here on exhibit, he saw this large flag, the Star-Spangled Banner flag, being raised over Fort McHenry, and he was relieved. And so at that time, he was so moved to start writing down the lyrics to what became our national anthem in 1931. And so that document that he wrote those lyrics on is for the first time ever here at the Museum of American History until the 6th of July has been united with the flag that inspired those words.
And it really was such a great opportunity for us to get to see these two items together, both the flag and the lyrics. So, of course, we have to thank Jennifer Jones and everyone at the American History Museum who made our visit possible.
It was amazing. But we're taking a break now. When we come back, our Independence Day special explores patriotism through the eyes of U.S. war veterans. You're watching On Assignment.
A surge in patriotism. It's a common phenomenon during times of war, but the rapid advance we've been seeing recently of Islamist militants in Iraq is forcing many Americans to re-examine the 8-year war the U.S. and its allies fought in the Middle Eastern country.
Nearly 4,500 U.S. service members died in the conflict, along with tens of thousands of Iraqis. Now, some U.S. veterans of the war are reflecting on the sacrifices.
VOA Midwest correspondent Kane Faribaugh examined the impact of the war in the U.S. state of Illinois. Kane will join us in a moment, but first, let's take a look at some of his reporting.
Paris, Illinois is a patriotic town, awash in red, white, and blue. American Legion Post Commander Tom Knowles says it's been that way since the Iraq War began in 2003.
Instantly, the flag sails went up. You've seen flags flying everywhere.
Noel says while the patriotism has not faded, the mood did change in 2004 when news of the mounting casualties from the town's Illinois National Guard unit, the 1544th Transportation Company, started filtering in.
5 right here from our unit, just right next door, just all at once. That was a real shock.
And Kane Faribault joins us now from Illinois. He is standing in front of the Mideast Conflicts Memorial Wall in Marseilles, one of the largest memorials in the U.S. honoring service members who have died in the Middle East.
Hey, Kane, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us something. What struck you about what these veterans and their families told you about what they feel now about the war in Iraq?
Well, what struck me the most is that there is not a lot of resentment towards the Iraqis. I think that family members, as well as the veterans that served alongside those that paid the ultimate sacrifice, many of them told me that they only wish they could finish the job. They wish that there was something that they could do in order to make sure that all of the work, all of the sacrifice that was put into the 8-year-long war had some result in the end. I think there's a lot of people who are sort of anxious about what it means, the destabilization that's going on there now. Many don't want to return, but those that were in uniform that had already served in Iraq told me that if they should be called, they're ready and they're trained and they're able to help the Iraqis stand up on their own.
And can you mention these sacrifices? Of course, some very emotional accounts here from people who lost loved ones in the war. One of the men you spoke with told you about the significance of the war mission for his son who lost his life in Iraq. Let's go ahead and roll that clip.
Michael's proudest moment, he told me they were guarding a polling site during the elections, the Iraqi elections. He said his proudest moment was seeing those Iraqis walking around with that blue ink on their finger. So that was his proudest moment.
Kane, it's such a difficult moment. Tell us a little bit about Corey Thompson, and also tell us a little bit about where you're standing.
Well, it's interesting. When I first went up to where all these motorcyclists were, I saw a gentleman who had a necklace or an identification badge around his chest. And I saw there was a gold star, and immediately I knew what that meant. That meant that he had a son or a daughter that died in combat. And so I approached him, and as a correspondent, you're always kind of nervous to sort of do this. You don't want to tread on anybody's feelings. You don't want to upset anybody. But I definitely wanted to talk to him about why he was coming to this motorcycle freedom run and why it was important for him to be there. And as soon as I went up to him, he was extremely gracious. He was very open. He was very kind to me, and he was very willing to tell me about his son. His son died in a helicopter crash near Talil Air Base, and obviously for him it was devastating. But in some ways, his son's death has sparked a new life for Corey Thompson, in which he is a Gold Star father now, and he advocates for Gold Star families, talking about what it's like to lose a family member in combat and what those sacrifices mean. And so he was extremely willing to talk to me on camera, and it's one of the few times in my career where in the course of interviewing somebody, I got a little emotional. It's hard not to, feel sorry for him, especially when he seems to have kindness, graciousness, openness, and forgiveness in his heart as you're talking to him. I didn't detect the least bit of anger or resentment, and so I think for me it was definitely an emotional but rewarding experience to talk to him. And to put it into perspective, I'm standing next to a wall that has thousands of names on it on these different panels here. And each of these names has a Gold Star mother or a Gold Star father somewhere out there who has a similar story to Corey Thompson's. And to know that this is the cost of war. These are the sacrifices made in the name of freedom. These are things that are emotional to anybody who comes to visit these sort of memorials. This one just happens to be one of the largest in the U.S., specifically focusing on those who lost their lives in the Middle East. But during a holiday season like the 4th of July or Memorial Day, you see memorials like this generate a lot of interest, generate a lot of people coming to visit, and you see a lot of flags waving, a lot of patriotism. But when you're standing in a place like this, you also see a lot of tears.
Of course. Well, Kane, thank you so much for your reporting, for coming to us on location, on assignment today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're taking a break now. When we return, a look back at the VOA of the Cold War. You're watching On Assignment. We want to wrap up our special Independence Day program with a story that is straight out of the Cold War, an important episode in the history of the world and the voice of America.
In 1952, a 103-meter Coast Guard cutter was transformed into VOA's mobile broadcasting base. Its mission in the Mediterranean Sea to send information beyond the Iron Curtain to counter Soviet propaganda.
And as VOA's Daniela Schreier reports, A Voice for Hope and Freedom is the name of a traveling exhibit about the ship and its 12-year mission.
In the Cold War against the Communists, the United States commissions the Coast Guard cutter Courier as its first seagoing radio transmitter.
The Courier sent news, music, and hope behind the Iron Curtain. Commissioned by President Harry Truman in 1952, this ship was an essential U.S. communications tool during the Cold War. Codenamed Operation Vagabond, the floating relay station was a unique partnership between the Voice of America and the Coast Guard. Richard Haldy was a lieutenant on the ship from 1958 to 1961.
Total mission of the Coast Guard cutter Courier was to be Voice of America in the Middle East and Southern Russian republics so that they could hear from the outside world. The Russians continually tried to jam us, but were unable to on a regular basis, so that the broadcast primarily went through.
Here's how jamming sounds when it cuts in on a Voice of America broadcast.
Bob Marriott was one of the original crew of the Courier in 1952. He worked in the relay room, which had 3 decks and a list of 3 frequencies for each program.
We had a long list because the Russians jammed it. Believe it or not, we'd get a good clear signal, and then we would hear this jamming, and then it sounded like a coffee grinder, and we'd have to switch to another receiver.
Some special programs will be sent directly from the ship, as is being shown here.
The Courier broadcast programming in 13 languages, 7 days a week, thanks to a 150 kilowatt signal that was 3 times stronger than traditional land-based transmitters. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the end of the Courier's mission in 1964. An exhibit opened in its honor in June at the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. Curator Jennifer Gaudio titled the exhibit, A Voice of Hope and Freedom, inspired by short notes written on toilet or tissue paper, sent from listeners behind the Iron Curtain.
The Voice of America is about broadcasting hope and truth, and the major mission of the Coast Guard is saving lives.
For 12 years, VOA broadcasts were often filled with American music, jazz numbers like this Charlie Parker jam session.
Well, you can do anything but take me over my blue suede shoes.
And the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley, was also relayed around the world. This cultural exchange was meant to inspire hearts and minds behind the Iron Curtain.
It wells the pride up in you that you were a part of a significant unit, even though we never fired a shot. We were a major factor in the Cold War.
The Courier, a ship without guns, goes into battle armed with the greatest weapon of all, truth.
Daniela Schreier, Voice of America, New London, Connecticut.
And with that, we have come to the end of our special Independence Day edition of On Assignment.
Yes, it was fun to make the show, but it was great also to get out in the field and to see some of the many fascinating pieces of American history that's right here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it really was. And if you missed part of this show, you can always find any of our episodes anytime at voanews.com under the Programs tab at the top of the page.
And on behalf of everyone here on Assignment, thank you so much for watching. Catch us next week.